people to understand that way. And they go, what? You're a Federal Reserve, PhD researcher, whatever, and you're putting out explanations that you know are incorrect because you think it's easier to understand. Goes, well, yeah, well, I think it is easier to understand. Well, maybe it is, but it's like, what are you doing? Well, anyway, the next year or so, I started in Chicago. The same thing is there, but there was a footnote that said, in reality, with the larger banks, the process is the reverse. But that was like a footnote to this wrong explanation, explaining that it was wrong. Yeah. So again, to your point, these people know these things. Just, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what it is about them. I mean, I'm not like that, but a lot of people are.
So I think is Logic back? So I think he kind of
dropped out several times.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it looks like he's trying to connect, maybe. Oh no, that's Ibrahim. Okay.
Yeah, he came back,
Ibrahim is,
let him in, and then
he's trying to connect the dots.
Yeah,
yes.
some of these dots are just elusive. Someone joins the lead. So I just wanted to say, obviously, I don't want this conversation to be like we're just asking the questions, because there's a lot of powerful minds here, and so I don't even want to act like I know all the questions to ask. And so if either one of you want to ask another one questions, like I hope it's free flowing like that, we can do it that way. But just to kind of get things started, Professor Craemer and Dr. Darity, one of the things we wanted to kind of talk about, and maybe you can provide some clarity on, was there's been this recent issue, or I should say discussion about quadrillions, and
yes,
it's kind of picked up, I don't want to say picked up some steam, but it's got notoriety from a few interesting news publications via some people that are advocating for reparations, and they wanted to lead using the number of $6.2 quadrillion. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about that and maybe provide some clarity.
I should probably clarify where that was coming from. There was the article that Professor Darity and I and a number of other co-authors published in 2020, where this was basically a computational example of what happens when you slightly increase the interest rate from 3% to 6%, that the estimated debt grows exponentially. So it was not necessarily meant as a proposed amount. We were thinking rather about the, that at a minimum, the reparations should close the black-white wealth gap in the United States. But I think it's not unreasonable to think about larger amounts as well. The claims may be justified. Whether it's politically feasible or not is a completely different matter. But the 6.2 quadrillion was not meant as an actual proposal. It was simply a computational example.
Yeah, there's a set of examples in the article, and I think early in the article we say that the minimal standard should be elimination of the racial wealth gap,
right.
But we proceed to examine a number of ways in which you might compute the bill. But one thing that I'd like to add, and I'm not sure if Thomas shares this point of view, but one thing I'd like to add is that the $6.2 quadrillion figure is an estimate that's generated based upon the cost to the individuals who were subjected to enslavement.
Right.
And it is not at all clear that that's a foundation for making a payment to living descendants of persons who were enslaved. And I think that's a reason why we focus on the wealth gap as an indicator of the consequences across the generations of the impact of various atrocities, including slavery, on the living descendants. But it's not at all clear that you would pay the living descendants the amount that was due to their ancestors who directly experienced slavery. And so, so there's two reasons for being a bit skeptical about the $6.2 quadrillion figure. One is whether or not it's actually appropriate to be paid to living descendants of the persons who were enslaved. And the second is, it's one illustration of the magnitude of the kind of bill you can generate as you change the interest rate that you use for compounding purposes.
And I might add, it's also an illustration of the magnitude of the injustice that happened, you know, because a 6% interest rate is not unreasonable. This is what a lot of the sales contracts of enslaved, you know, of selling enslaved people actually specified. Georgetown University's sales contract of the GU 272, for example, specifies 6% interest. It's not outrageous. But I agree with you that it's not necessarily meant as a practical proposal.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that the rate of return that people have gotten, the average rate of return on financial assets like stocks that are traded on Wall Street, is actually closer to 9%, and so. So 6% is not an outrageous figure from that standpoint. Yeah.
And, so let me jump in real quick. Now, I appreciate both of those breakdowns. Outstanding. I apologize for my technical difficulties. So, and after I say this piece, I want to kick over to Mosler so he can chime in. So, when we talk about the math and how it was generated, we appreciate, we know mathematically these are very reasonable numbers, right? But ultimately, reparations is going to be a result of politics. And so politically, how my concern and our organization is concerned in how do we package that up in advocacy? Because we know, understanding the political climate of the nation right now, the misunderstanding of debt, the misunderstanding of the deficit spending of the government, it's just you go crazy. You start talking about quadrillions, people think cash, and they think like insolvency and doom. So politically, is it like, so that you say you never really spoke to the political feasibility of it, but that's really, in my mind, the most important part of it, because it's ultimately going to be a matter of politics that gets it done. So even if it was going to be 6.6 quadrillion, 20 quadrillion, is really not my concern. It's like, how do we pay for it in terms of real costs, like resources, is like, and so, because people in the grassroots community are picking up the math part of it and then just like not really, in my personal opinion, not really thinking about how the politics play out policy wise, or how you get national energy.
Logic, I'd like to push back a little bit, because if our criteria for determining what we are going to do is whether or not we perceive it as politically feasible, we probably would not have invested any time in pursuing reparations in the first place. So I don't think that should be the standard. I'm suggesting that the $6.2 quadrillion figure is a potential, somewhat legitimate estimate of how much the cost was to the individuals who were enslaved. And it's a time cost. It's based upon Thomas's very, very sensible assumption that individuals who were enslaved had all of their time stolen in the course of every single day by the people who were the slaveholders. But I'm not sure that that's a reasonable amount of money to transfer to the folks who are their living descendants, who did not have that direct exposure to slavery. What we want to be concerned about for the living descendants is the long-term consequences, the long-term economic consequences of what happened to their ancestors, and not just their ancestors who were enslaved, but their ancestors who were subjected to a century of legal segregation in the United States, violent massacres, as well as over-incarceration, lynchings, including lynchings by the police, and so forth. So we think that's captured by the racial wealth gap in a fairly effective way. And that should be the basis for it. But I wouldn't want to pull back on pursuing the right thing because we're trying to make a judgment about whether or not it's politically feasible.
Okay, so I definitely understand that portion of it, and it's definitely not suggesting that the way that the math was generated was like incorrect in any way, but or to think that politically, you know, imaginative ideas can't be achieved. But just like abolition, even now, I'm not talking about the possibility of getting reparations actually done, but far as being tactfully presenting the case tactfully, I'm concerned about actually being victorious in it. And I'm saying, so if we could get it done and we can get 6.2 trillion accomplished, or even amounts higher than that, without that being the parading, like in politics, I've been a part of policy, and we use the appeal of the merit of the argument to get figures worked out in private, right? So publicly, we're talking about the merit of the idea, of the harm, of the justice that needs to be achieved. And then we talk about because ultimately all of reparations isn't just cash payments to individuals. Like, from my standpoint anyway, I don't have monopoly on what reparations is, but we teach about the restoration of all of the set-asides that were for this category of families had the status of freedmen, like after the Civil War. You had the trust company and bank, freedmen, trust company and savings company, the banks, the land grants, the different things that Frederick Douglass was trying to do with individuals around the country, far as mechanizing land, creating freedmen towns, and just becoming American and having like a real American life, economic inclusion in the purest sense of the form. So to me, a restoration program for like reparations, in my mind, would be also the reenactment of many of those policies that really are responsible for us being locked out of Americanism, along with the generation of the wealth gap. And so,
but those are the policies that produce the contemporary racial wealth gap. It's the cumulative effect across generations of a host of policies that the federal government conducted, including the ones that took place in that period of time that excluded Blacks from access to the same levels of property that were provided by the government to white Americans.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Warren, do you have anything to say about what you heard so far?
Yeah, two things. First, and I hope I remember the second one by the time I finish first, is I think we're dealing with a fallacy of composition here. So let's say there's 150 million houses right now in the United States. Keep it simple, each valued at $1 million. And there are 40 million people who are owed reparations. I agree with that premise, who don't have a house. In fact, they have no wealth. So you have a big wealth gap of $1 million between 150 million who own homes and the 40 million who don't. And so we give them each a credit of $1 million to buy a home. And what happens? At the end of the day, they won't be able to buy, prices are going to go up. They won't be able to buy 40 million homes. They might wind up with 20 million or smaller homes if it's indivisible. And what was $1 million home is now going to be a $2 or $3 million home. And so the wealth gap stays the same and may even get widened because of the dynamic effects of giving everybody money as reparations. And you see that all the time. We just had trillions of dollars of stimulus checks, as they were called, handed out to people. And at the end of the day, it made the wealth effect was that it all wound up at the end of the day after it was spent, upper income people. Okay, so we got a little bit of a dynamic process and a fallacy of composition going when you just say, okay, this is a number of dollars that are owed. So the way I would look at it, and my humble opinion here is we've gotten together from, we've been on very different paths, and now we're back together. And is, okay, we've got 150 million homes. The distribution of ownership is 150 million homes are going to group A, and group B, which has 40 million, other people don't have any homes. So at the end of the day, what we want to see is all 190 million people with roughly equal homes of equal value. Okay, and how do we get from here to there? So in other words, if you're talking about you want wealth equality, or you want, if wealth equality is the goal, which I hear it is, that's where I would say, and it's not just today's wealth, it's the present value of future wealth, so which includes opportunity and everything else. That start with the wealth that we have, which is the real substance, and come up with a way that this wealth is divided in an equitable way going forward. Now, if going forward you think it should be equitable, yet the group that's been discriminated against should have 10% more than everybody else, okay, say so. But in other words, you got to answer the question. The way I see it is, the question is who is going to pay for it in real terms. We have a certain amount of GDP, we have a certain amount of real output. If somebody's going to get a lot more, then and the output's going to be the same in real terms as growing at 2 or 3%, someone else is going to get a lot less. If we have unemployment, we can do it based on a full employment budget by going to full employment, that's fine. But that's a relatively small adjustment in this process. So am I making sense to you there?
Yeah, I wish you'd read the last chapter of my book.
Oh, it probably says that.
Well, I mean, the premise in the book is that the financial issue is one that should be addressed through the lens of modern monetary theory.
Okay.
And that the ultimate constraint on any new expenditure is the potential adverse effects on inflation.
Well,
and so we talk explicitly about ways in which you might finance this project with a minimal inflation risk.
right, but I'm looking beyond that to just say that the actual physical capital of the country, who owns it now, who would you like to see owning it, how are we going to get from here to there?
Yeah, but the physical capital of the country is not directly connected to the monetary value of that capital stock, as you know, given the nature of speculative markets.
Well,
and you don't necessarily have to come back to that value.
yeah, I'm not saying it's entirely true, but it's a real starting point in terms of real standard of living. Some people have enough food.
So you maintain the standard of living by minimizing the level of inflation.
Not necessarily. Okay, inflation, at worst is which is not, I'm not going to minimize. It's a distribution issue, right? It doesn't change the physical goods and services, the physical output.
Well, no, I mean, to avoid having inflation, you would have to have an increase in the availability of the physical output for people to purchase, or you would have to have very, very sporadic use of the additional income.
All right, so what I'm going to say, it's going to be a redistribution of the existing capital stock, no matter how you look at it, and the existing output. If we had 28 trillion.
Okay, fair enough. Out of the existing output, if there's no growth, yeah.
But yeah, and if there is growth, it's going to be 1 or 2%, which for this problem is trivial. Okay, so so what I'm saying is, how would we like to see the real distribution of GDP every year to, and what you get is representative of your equity, right? So if you're a 1% equity holder, you get 1% of the output, so to speak. So just to keep the terminology straight. Okay, so if we have 350 million people and we all wanted to have 350 million for the output, more or less, how do we get from here to there? And that's the question of how we're going to pay for it. Because right now, 100 million of those 350 million people are not getting an equitable share of the output every year by a lot, by an order of magnitude, like 10 times, whatever it is. So, because part of that is immediate consumption, and part of that is a stake in future consumption, which is the investment component. And so, I don't know what the magnitudes are, but no matter how you look at it, the question of how are you going to pay for it in real terms, to me, has to be addressed first. That gives you the clarity, the vision, the goal, the target to then aim your monetary guns at to get to that goal. But you can't start, I can't start on the monetary side I don't know what the objective is on the real side. And so
So from my perspective, the objective is to give each eligible Black American, and these would be individuals who were descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States, or the folks that logic refers to as the posterity of the freedmen.
Yeah.
Okay. You give each one of them an asset valued sufficiently to achieve the average level of wealth that is currently held by white Americans in real or in constant 2019 dollars.
Yeah, so you want to give everybody, say, inflation adjusted bonds or something.
Or an annuity or a trust account, whatever
yeah.
would be the equivalent in value. But it would have to be measured in 2019 dollars.
Right,
I mean, that would have to be written into the legislation to ensure the constancy of the value.
And what percent of GDP do you think that is? Or how much do you think that is?
It would be about, to do that, it would cost at least $14 trillion at the present moment.
Okay, and that would be a one-time transfer.
Or no, as we propose in our book, it could be a transfer that's conducted over the course of a decade. We wouldn't want to do it more than a decade.
No, but it'd be 14, if it's 14 trillion, might be $1 trillion a year for 14 years.
That's right.
Okay,
exactly.
But it's a one-time adjustment. And then
over the course of that decade. Yes, it's a one-time.
And then, okay, I won't disagree with that. I don't think that's going to, I'm not sure you'll be happy with the results, 20 years from now as to what it did.
I have no idea what the world would look like 20 years from now, if that was done.
I've never seen any kids that receive that kind of money that's done them any good, but that's just my opinion. I've got like my own kids as examples.
Well, if you think about the Homestead Act allocations, 1.5 million white families get in excess of 270 million acres of land. And I would think that the present value of that allocation would not be very distant from the figure that we're talking about.
I know, but I go out to Colorado and you go on these, and they show you all these old homesteads where the people either died or left because they couldn't make it. None of them they're all gone, and then it got sold to ranchers later or something like that. So I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't a valuable transfer to a lot of people at the time, but interestingly enough, to your point, the study I saw not too long ago showed that the distribution of wealth in Europe is still along the lines of who won and who lost in the tulip bubble 1500. So I mean, they do have permanent but if you look at those families that won, the kids are all like, you don't want to have any of them for your own kids, I guarantee you that. They're troubled people, seriously troubled people. And like kings and queens, you look at those people, they're totally out to lunch. So this doesn't build character, let's put it that way. I'm not saying you wouldn't affect your wealth distribution, but
well, certainly.
Look, I'll stand here and say, look, the government can write that check. They can write 14 trillion over 14 years in real terms. It's not going to bounce. There might be some inflationary consequences, which is only a distributional consequence, which is what's due anyway, because ultimately it's about distribution of the real world. And so I would say on a technical basis, what you're saying is entirely doable, and there are no technical arguments against it.
Just one minor aside about the Homestead Act. You're absolutely correct that not all homesteaders were successful, but somebody got the land unless it was turned into parts of the national park system. And whoever ultimately got the land was a beneficiary of the initial allocation. And it's estimated now that there are 45 million living white Americans who are still benefiting from the Homestead Act allocation.
Okay, very good. And, but look, how many people, a lot of lottery winners too, and they're all benefiting from winning the lottery, right?
Yeah.
But it's not directed only to white people, but it's still.
So
So,
kind of getting back to the 6.2 quadrillion versus the 10 trillion from Darity's estimate.
No, I'm
My
saying
concern-
14. I'm saying 14 trillion now. So
Okay.
don't push me down too far.
Okay. Okay. My issue with the 6.2 quadrillion is that the reparationists who was advocating for it wanted like 161 million per person, and they basically wanted the whole lump sum of reparations in one lifetime. And I don't think you can really put a ceiling on reparations, but you can put a floor on it that will at least, you know, merge the racial wealth gap between blacks and whites, where it could, you know, basically will be erased. And if I had to compare it to like Jews, we really don't know how much reparations Jewish descendants and those who actually lived through the Holocaust got, because it comes in waves and it's still coming. So my thing, like with the 6.2 quadrillion, I thought the ask was too big all at once, you know, and it really gave no room for programs, because you can't put a price on programs either if it's meant to repair over generations.
Yeah, I would say the $6.2 quadrillion figure is a good illustration of what a reasonable estimate of the loss to the enslaved ancestors would have been. But with the understanding that even in reparations cases that happened in reality, not the full outstanding amount is usually repaid. There's usually negotiations. It also depends on what's feasible at the time financially and stuff. But what I like about the idea of going above and beyond the wealth gap is sometimes you have to aim above the target in order to hit it. So if you ask only for eliminating the black-white racial wealth gap, then that will be talked down during the negotiations. If you start a little higher, and that's a lot higher, but I mean, if you start higher, you might end up at the proper amount.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, historically, when Israel asked for reparations, they asked for a really small amount, and they thought at the time, because it was unprecedented, that this would be rejected and nothing would happen at all. In the meantime, that amount has been left in the dust, and reparations went far beyond what they initially asked. So
if the interest rate is higher than the growth rate, then it can't be done. So in real terms, so right now there probably isn't 7 quadrillion of real wealth to distribute.
right.
It's probably more than the total. And so you're talking about shifting everything from 80% to 20% of the people. That's what the math would imply would be equitable.
Mm.
And I don't see it that way. In other words, if they had gotten that money then, it would not have compounded at that rate in real terms. Because a lot of it would have gotten lost immediately, just like the homesteaders. Maybe 75% of it was lost, and 25% compounded, and another wound up with 10% benefiting, which was 45 million families or something. So things get filtered down, and so again, it's sort of a fallacy of composition. But, not to diminish the point that it's going to be a very large number, no matter how you think, but it was a massive injustice.
Yes, and so like kind of building off of what Tanner was saying, my mindset, and like just to help us, this conversation is amazing, by the way. Like this is like what I wanted, like really y'all to discuss this so we could like figure out how to educate on the grassroots level. You guys all have your various expertise in this thing, and so to figure out how to really create a unified message, we have to have a unified understanding on the impact and how to get all this stuff done. And I know that this is a capitalist world. In a capitalist society, you want to start, in my mind, you want to start with what means the most, which is the actual capital. So I am 100% supporter of like direct cash payments. But I'm also very passionate about the restoration and the full funding of the programs that were lost and destroyed, like that we need, like the set asides, like the Freedmen's Hospitals, which is going to take a certain amount of appropriation. And I understand that when we do the land grants and we do other political policy things, like this is something that's going to have to be allocated into the budget. So is the OMB, and my thing is with the 6.2 quadrillion leading forward, is that something that's going to be itemized on the OMB? If they're going to allocate and say, okay, reparations program 6.2 quadrillion, let's allocate that to the reparations fund or something, like, how's that going to work far as appropriations is concerned? And where does that leave room for program development and things of that nature?
So let me just give you another angle here. So let's say right now, government's 25% of GDP. That means this private sector wealth and everything else you're talking about is fighting for 75% of GDP. If public services increase to 75% of GDP through really good public health, which goes beyond Medicare for all, it's fully staffed and functioning, through quality public education that starts pre-K or earlier, including proper meals for children and everything else that they might need, and all the other public services. Now, the amount that we're arguing over that is left for disparities of private sector wealth is only 25% of GDP. Okay, so one way to equalize things is to have more public services, which disproportionately benefit lower income people anyway. And you can increase real standards of living, quality of life, opportunities, everything else by 200–300% by increasing your public services, in good public services, not people digging holes, people filling them in, but real quality stuff, up to 75%, let's say. And you still have a capitalistic society with the other 25%, which is enormous. And you have a different world that you're born into. Now, it doesn't make up for any past injustice, and it doesn't specifically target any group, but the group that helps the most are the ones that today are the most disadvantaged, which is the group you're talking about. So, that group becomes the largest beneficiary of this, maybe to the tune of 60 or 65% of it. Yet it's not even mentioned in the proposal. And I think when spelled out like that politically, you got a very strong case, and it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. And you're not taking anything away from anybody. You're just giving the piece they're fighting over gets smaller, is all you're doing. And you're adding, high quality resources to the piece that everybody gets, participates in.
Well, Josh, you was about to say something, because go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, for when I think about that idea, it makes sense from the standpoint of it may be easier to advocate for politically because you're probably going to get more, you're including more people, so maybe more people will be in favor of that. But when I think about the justice aspect of it, like I feel like that has to be an important component to this whole thing, because like America needs to send a message that you can't do this thing, you can't do this, we can't have this again. That has to be made up for. And I feel like with that part of creating I should say a better America where we would get the disproportionate benefit. Well, do you think that's great for like after we?
Yeah. So look, if we go to a real Medicare for all, where all the facilities are properly funded, that's going to, add more real resources, more benefit to the, let's call it the freedmen community, or whatever, the objects of reparation.
Yeah, you can say freedmen. You can say freedmen.
The freedmen community, then the 14 trillion. That benefit is way more than the 14 trillion. Okay, but it's not. It doesn't morally cure any injustice that was done, right? So, but at the same time, it is a benefit, and it is one of the things that's happened where your medical care for the freedmen is less than it should be. Hospitals were closed or whatever, they don't have the money for the co-pays, whatever it is. And so by,
Well, this, Warren, let me jump in. This is a concern of mine, right? And I'm
Yeah.
really dedicated to the justice side, like Josh, and in conjunction with the moral issue, it's really a sense of like, when we're talking about fixing these injustices, I'm really talking about tangible, actual things that happen. And so like, if I drive a Camry, right, and I get into a car crash, we can't say, let's fix all Camrys because your Camry is going to get fixed as well. No, I need the specific policy to fix my Camry first. And then if like, we agree that like, because what caused my car to have the accident could hurt other Camrys, let's go ahead and put some provisions after the fact to prevent that, then I'm all for that. But we have to fix my car accident first because I experienced the damage. And so the compound on that problem is the government made congressional commitments to do that with various freedmen bills that we have presented and educated the public with on many occasions. They agreed that the harm was on them. They agreed to repair the harm with in every way imaginable. Freedmen hospitals, freedmen homesteads, freedmen like all kind of different things. So when those things were, you can be proven that they were set up to fail, sabotage, and had like government sanctioned, malfeasance. That
especially the Freedmen's Bank.
Yeah, that has to be specifically treated. And then we can talk about like class-based stuff.
Well, okay. And the other thing, of course, is that these universal programs that might have a disproportionate benefit for Black Americans are not likely to eliminate the racial wealth gap. I did a report called Running the Numbers on Closing the Racial Wealth Gap.
I saw that. Very good.
Yeah, I attempted to assess a variety of these attempts at universal programs.
Yeah, and I didn't say.
And I do favor these programs, as you know, because I'm an advocate of what's called an economic bill of rights for the 21st century. But I do not see them as an alternative to reparations.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they are. Okay, and I'm not saying it's going to close the wealth gap. But what I'm saying is the scope of the wealth gap becomes, an argument over 25% of GDP instead of 75. And so it becomes less important. The whole wealth, it's a shrinking pie. And so by having that wealth gap become a shrinking pie, kind of inflating away, right? The issue, let's say government was 100%. You had a full socialist economy. Government owned all means of production. What then should reparations be? When you're at that level and everybody's getting the same, to each according to his needs or whatnot. Let's say that somehow worked. Now what do you do? Okay, and the other thing is,
I'm not sure if there's a debt that's owed. It doesn't matter what the structure of the social system is. The debt is still owed in some way.
Yeah. But let's talk about this. Came up with Greece because Greece was looking for German reparations during the crisis with Reparations. And I said to him, okay, so let's say you get reparations from Germany. Who's going to pay for it? It's not going to be the Krupps and the guys who made all the money and did that stuff during World War II. It's going to be the Polish immigrant who's working in the BMW factory, who's going to wind up with fewer calories a day to get transferred to Greece. The idea of, you look at the real physical transfers of wealth behind it, there's no equity in that, under what they had proposed. It was like worse equity in that than what they were trying to do with the reparations. So that's what I'm saying. You got to look at who's going to pay for this.
So Thomas, who actually paid for the German reparations?
Well, it was the German government for.
But in real terms.
In real terms, I'm not sure how to assess
who eats less food. Not the guys at the top. Who drives fewer cars. Not the guys at the top who can't fly in a private jet. Not the guys.
Why do you see reparations payments as a zero-sum game?
Okay, unless you've got real growth, then
yes, indeed. That would be one of the hopes of the process. Yeah.
And if you have real growth, that would have been distributed a certain percentage. If you're now going to change the distribution of the growth, fine by some, but you're going to give all of it to someone else, you're depriving someone. The guy you're depriving is that Polish immigrant working in a BMW factory, you know, for 400 euro a week. He's a guy who winds up with a lower standard of living because of it, or not as high as it would have been, and not his boss and not anybody up top, whose incomes and wealth is far beyond anything that affects their standard of living. But changing it 50% isn't going to change their standard of living. Their marginal propensity to consume is zero.
So you are in fact thinking of a world where there is no significant amount of growth taking place.
No, you can have the growth. I'm fine, but
You need to have enough. I mean, is there a,
oh,
you
yeah.
saying that there might not be enough? Or?
Okay, if it comes out of growth, now it's coming out of the, you know, whose growth and standard of living is it coming out of? It's coming out of the lowest income people there. Our societies are structured so that the lowest income people pay for all this stuff in real terms.
I mean, how are they paying? How are they paying for it if you have growth? I don't understand. Do you mean that they're paying relatively more? You're not saying they're paying an absolute amount, are you?
Their real standard of living is not growing 2% as it would have been otherwise.
But it's not falling.
It's not falling if you're
Thank
paying
you.
on growth.
So I mean, I can
they're
only
paying for it in real terms. No, nobody else.
I can only, from the historical example in Germany, I can only say Germany's economy at the time was humming.
Yeah.
When the reparations agreement was made.
Yeah.
And Israel was in dire straits, and it had a beneficial effect for Israel, but because Israel also started to trade with Germany, which it didn't do previously, it did have a positive effect on the German economy. After all, in the Middle East, you know, all of a sudden they had a market in the Middle East they previously didn't have. So I'm not sure what that means in real terms. And
yeah, so
that's what we refer to in economics as the transfer problem. The possibility that the donor will actually benefit from making the donation in some way.
Right, exactly.
And that's exactly, what you're
look, in trade, in real terms, exports are costs and imports are benefits, right? And your real wealth is your pile of stuff, which is your real domestic output plus imports minus exports. And that difference is called real terms of trade. And they don't look at it that way. They look at the number of dollars in surplus or deficit.
So Warren, you're not a Keynesian, really. You're not. You truly believe in this concept of real product underlying the performance of an economy.
No, it's not underlying the performance. It's how you measure success or failure. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
the monetary flows now.
I don't accept that metric. I don't accept that metric.
Well, you know, the metric is, to me, I don't see how there's any dispute that your success is measured in real terms. It's the only point of economics is to consume. Why work and do something if it's not going to get consumed? You know, just
I'm not sure that the only point of economics is to consume.
Well, I'm not saying that's a
you know, I'm about to give a talk saying that economists typically say that scarcity is the foundation for the field. And I'm going to give a talk that says that that's actually inaccurate and that there are two alternative ways to think about what the foundation for economics should be. One is Keynes's notion of uncertainty, and the other is Amartya Sen's focus on inequality.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that there is scarcity either necessarily, but I mean, certain things there's scarcity, but in general, it's about other things. And I'm not saying that governments measure their success in real terms, or that politicians measure in real terms and get elected on success in real terms. I'm saying I look at it in real terms for, you know, economics, let's say with the capital E, you know, the academic, from an academic point of view, from how I define economics, okay, as opposed to finance. And I grew up in finance, so I know how that works, and I know how that determines the real world. I'm not saying it doesn't, but your success or failure of your housing, you know, if you have more houses at the end of the year than you started with, that's an improvement. If you have fewer, even though you might have dollars in a bank account, in real terms, you're worse off. If you have less food than you had the year before, and you can only eat 2 meals a day, you might have a lot of money in the bank, but in real terms, you're worse off. And presumably the money can't buy food. So look, if exports were so good, then if you export, you know, the best of all possible worlds would be to export everything. But what happens if you export everything? Well, you die. You know, the guy, and if imports are so bad, what happens if you import everything? Well, you don't have to work. You just get to play golf with your imported golf clubs and eat your imported food. So in real terms, and not in terms of economic justice and morality or what motivates people, but it's, to me, that's the success or failure of the economy, not the success or failure of the politics or finance, but of the economy. That is the point. There's no point in working, producing something and throwing it in the ocean in real terms. That's called waste. Okay. And
So let me jump in for a little
Yeah,
lack
yeah,
of
yeah.
understanding, right? So if the policies and the program is set aside for a specific group of people, and we can see that specific groups performance and everything have an increase, then that was a successful program, right? Now, if
That's
we're
right, that's
saying that because of that adjustment to this specific group, which is an act of justice and actually giving them access to the equity that they put in the country, that other groups in the country will feel the effects of that shift, then that maybe that's how it should have been in the first place. So we have been living through the not having it for hundreds of years, not having access to our equity, and that didn't feel really good for us.
But what I'm saying is, yeah, I
Go
agree. I agree 100%. But on the other hand, and I'm not to disagree with you, but if the group that's, you know, slipping is, women at home with children, who have disabilities, it puts a different light on it, right? You got to look at who is paying for it in real terms. That's all I'm saying. And once you do look at it, who is paying for it in real terms?
I'm trying to argue that nobody has to pay for it in real terms unless you're arguing exclusively about relative position and not absolute position.
Well, opportunity costs, yeah. So it's not relative versus absolute. It's okay.
I don't even use the concept opportunity cost. Go ahead.
But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So let's say relative positions, yes. And the relative position is somebody else has less than they would have otherwise. So what I'm saying is you're going to improve who is going to be going down the amount you're going up in relative terms. It's not going to be the rest of society. It's going to be a specific group, and that group's going to be the lowest income, most disadvantaged groups. They're going to.
No, that's not transparent either. I
totally agree. It's not transparent.
When we introduced this particular approach to trying to pay reparations, our premise was that every eligible recipient would receive the same amount.
Yeah.
And the net effect would be to equalize the average level of wealth between all blacks and whites in the United States, but it would give blacks a higher median level of wealth than whites.
Yeah.
And some people have objected to that, even though for 56 years since the end of slavery, whites have had a considerably higher median level wealth than blacks.
I'm saying
that is not a situation in which the absolute position of whites is worsened. And so I'm just really not sure,
I'm saying that's a fallacy of composition. Because if you look at it in real terms, that can't happen.
I have no idea why. I don't get your argument.
Let's say the total wealth is the housing stock. And there's 150 million homes.
But the total wealth is not the housing stock.
Okay, well, what else is it?
Warren, you know it isn't.
All right, well, let's start with something. Let's say it's Bitcoin. I don't know. But let's start with something. Whatever it is. Okay, it's when you're talking real wealth, it's a tangible thing. It's it could be intangible to some degree, but let's look at the tangible wealth. Okay, the iron ore deposits, the oil wells, the rigs, the machinery, the capital in the factories. Somebody owns that stuff, either directly or through pension funds or something.
But Jeff Bezos's billionaire status does not correspond in a one-to-one fashion to specific physical goods and services.
His billionaire status is the market's estimate of the present value.
There we go. And that is not the same thing as the physical capital stock.
Yes, but treasury securities that are indexed to inflation is the same thing. That if you want to give people stock indexed to the return on some, crazy thing like, Amazon's profits 60 years from now, fine. If it doesn't pan out, you get nothing. If you want to start with that, okay. But, if you look at, we're talking Treasury Securities Index to inflation, that's some kind of real capital stuff. It's implied in that CPI. That's what things cost. Jeff Bezos's assets are not in CPI.
No, that's true.
So I'm just saying there's some fallacies of composition in some of these assumptions that, not in the assumption themselves, but that arise from that are worthy of consideration. And even more important, if you do address what I'm talking about, these real outcomes, and come up with an answer to that, most of your criticism goes away.
Well, and
I would say most of it, but a core part of it goes away.
Well, that's kind of the intent of this program, right? To kind of bring those two things together, right? So what I understand, I'm learning a lot in this conversation quite fast. And so what I want to do is bridge those gaps of understanding or agreement together. So there is a resource issue in my mind, or a subject matter that involves resources in my idea, because ultimately I want the best constructed reparations program and project, right? That deals with capital, that deals with set-asides, that deals with protections, and that has a measurable a way to look at whether this program was successful or not, right? I need it to be a generational impact to that really addresses generational harm. So how is the best way to go about doing that with real things? Right. If some people, like, we got to understand that a lot of people's wealth position came from suppressing other people's wealth position. So if we do the right thing by resetting the justice factor, like, or implementing justice, right? And adjusting that group to get closer to the actual reflection of equity that these families should have. And if other people feel what the result of that would have been naturally if we had access to the equity all the time, that's just called justice to me, right? And so
let me just say, and it's a little bit, I'm not trying to make this flip, but it's a little bit of, if you want to get out of a hole, you got to stop digging. In that, we're still doing it, okay? It's still, these things are contributing to wealth at the top, but through all kinds of racial injustice, is ongoing. It's not, it didn't stop, and now we're trying to do catch up. It's like every quantum period of time is adding to this thing. Everybody who's underpaid because of racial injustice is adding to Bezos' wealth, okay, figuratively. And so you're trying to cure this with a one-time thing, which is fine. I mean, it's certainly, I see the justice of it. I do see justice. However, I see it as an ongoing process where, you're not going to get out of this hole. You can put some dirt in there or something, but you're still digging. The economy is still digging. It's still exploiting just as much as it did after the Civil War, if not more. Okay.
So when we think about ownership, in my mind, wealth is obviously dependent on ownership. Right, you have to own.
Oh, back up. Look at the unemployment rates. Okay, the black unemployment rate is double the white unemployment rate, probably 3 times. Okay, if you look at how many people are incarcerated, right, that should be added to it, because a lot of those people shouldn't be there. And what's that doing to distribution of wealth on an ongoing basis? It's making it worse. You've got this huge weight dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean, and you're talking about adding things to give it some buoyancy, but it's still going to be falling. It doesn't reverse the process. It's good, it's positive, I like it. I told you 14 trillion can be done, it's not going to do it. But this economy that we have is still, even with that, it's a drop in the bucket based on the speed of the hole that it's digging. Okay, and for racial injustice. That's why
so there's a quotation from Malcolm X that we repeat a number of times in the book, where he talks about a situation where somebody's plunged a knife 9 inches into his back, and he makes a distinction between pulling the knife out and healing the wound. And from our point of view, you need to do both. But pulling the knife out is not reparations. Reparations is healing the wound, and And the act of reparations is something that you can pursue regardless of whether or not the knife has actually been pulled out.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you don't try to take steps to pull the knife out.
Right.
But it also doesn't mean that if you haven't pulled the knife out all the way, you shouldn't do reparations.
Well, the knife's still going in deeper. That's the problem. And it's absolutely killing the community. And you look at what's going on with the drugs and the education and just the whole disassociation from of values that, look, I live in a predominantly Black American, African community here in St. Croix. You can see what people are doing to each other and what the government does, how the government exploits them. And it's a Black government exploiting Black people. I've never seen more regressive policies in my life. None of them will tax me. They're all taxing the guy's beer or something down there who's just got out of work all day and driving people off the island. And they've absolutely destroyed the community. And I can see the dynamics that's making this happen. And it's just painful to watch. And I run for office, I talk about it, and nobody votes for me. They vote for somebody else, and they keep doing it. It just gets progressively worse. And so I don't have your kind of experience, but I've got a little bit of experience. And so
Warren,
I
can
think
I
this
ask
knife
you?
is still going in. And not only is it going in, they're wiggling it around and cutting things that's going in. And you can start talking about healing the wound, it's fine. Put some mercure foam on it, put a Band-Aid on it, give this guy a golden casket when you kill him. But they're taking the life out. The life is being taken away.
Right.
It's a horrible process. And it's, I'm here to try and get some ideas on what I can see here or do with the community here. But it's a bigger process. It comes down from much higher up. It's not a grassroots. People are reacting to things around them. All these fallacies of composition, all of my 7 deadly innocent frauds are all at work with every one of them, with every political speech, which just digs the knife in deeper and exploits harder and harder.
Hey, Craemer,
When
you
you
got,
talk about,
I think
when
Craemer
you
had-
talk, when you talk about immigration from a new America point of view, it's my idea that, especially from a refugee, they came to America being the first world country because it's more safe and secure than the place they came from. And they came with the idea that they were willing to work, and they have no gripe with the American stratification system right now. So I don't see how reparations to freedmen will change that status unless there's some type of inherent bias within them. So to me, it's just a justice claim. It doesn't matter what a new America came, because they're coming with the intentions of benefiting them and their family, and like they're getting acclimated into this corrupt stratification economy that we already got going on. So like, to me, it doesn't really matter if they work for white billionaires or a Black stable community.
Yeah, I know. So look, you look at Israel with the Palestinians, okay? Palestine is an Israeli work camp. That's where the Israeli exporters are, that's who they're exploiting for their products. And they're hurting them. It's not genocide. I'm not trying to kill them any more than the farmer's trying to kill his cattle. Okay, they're exploiting their labor. They can make $500 a month in Palestine, and they go to Israel and make $1,500 a month, where everybody else in Israel is making $3,000. Okay, and they're the cheap labor that supports the export industries in today's world.
Well, with the fact that immigration is a privilege, not a right. I mean, that's really the relation. That's what you're sacrificing to be integrated into the new system. So to me, that's a separate conversation. Really doesn't impact the position at all. And they can either choose to continue to migrate or find somewhere else to work or do whatever they want to do. But what's more important is that, like, you have a foundational group of people who are instrumental in the success of America itself, not being able to access the equity that they would have had they had Reconstruction gone right, and they had not been left out of all these exclusive programs that other American citizens have. So my aim and objective is to how do we best put together policy initiatives that can put together and construct a program and project of restoration for this specific category of families. And so that's going to be cash payments and capital investments. That's going to be relocation initiatives undergirded by federal subsidy efforts. That's going to be allocation of resources, you know, and mechanizing of land, not just to do agricultural stuff, but to actually continue the work of what was already done for freedmen towns and communities and things like that, so that we can actually have access to life, liberty, and pursue happiness. Those were the commitments that the constitutional government through Congress made to that specific group of people through constitutional legislation. So with the adjustment of the interest rates of lost work and equity of that, in association, in conjunction with the actual restoration of these government promises by way of constitutional commitment work. That's why we've done so much research on the policy history. So because the government already did these things, it was sabotage. And so what I'm saying is, what is the funding capacity of the government, or what is the ticket, or not even the ticket, because to me, exponentially, it doesn't matter. But what needs to be done to build a project that restores these things specifically? And see, I think it's laid out pretty clearly when you get into the Freedmen legislation. And so when we're talking about, I talk of reparations in terms as a meal. And so if we don't know what the cost of dinner, let's say dinner's the meal, right? If we're going to eat dinner, it doesn't really make sense in my mind, if I want to produce the best dinner, to talk about how much money I have until I know what I want to eat. And so if I say we're having lobster, steak, and these exotic dishes, now okay, what does steak cost? What does the lobster cost? Now I can come up with an appropriate number of what dinner is going to cost me. But if I just start talking about the number and then say, what's for dinner, I think that sequence is kind of backwards, just in my personal opinion. I would like to say, this is what the repair is. I'm gonna do an appraisal on the damage, not just the wages, but that would go in there, right? And so now we would say, how do we build the rest of things? What would it cost to appropriate the resources to restore the Freedmen's hospitals, right? What would it be, the financial or the human resource costs or the natural resource costs to fund like relocation? Because like many people were driven out of the South through domestic terrorism and government sanctioned violence, right? So if that's a part of that program, how do they go back to their states of origin and like inherit and access their birthrights? And because of the lack of time of access and being able to actually do that, what is the potential cost of subsidizing the infrastructure costs and the buildings and the construction and the city planning and development for this specific group who the government said deserve these things, and this is what it was going to take to integrate them into America? And we all know the history that it never happened. So my thing is, let's get that done. And so if we can come up with the exact policies and programs that we want to enact, combined with the initial capital investment into this specific group, now we can start constructing policy that's nationally digestible. All right. And so that's my biggest concern, is to actually get something that can be passed and that can be sustainable for multiple generations. And I appreciate, that's why I want to have the conversation with you all, because I appreciate the work that y'all have done. Dr. Darity already knows how near and dear his work is to our heart. And I really want to bring in someone who's been in, the monetary operations side to talk about feasibility and practicability. But I really need us to come together for the nation's sake and for like the plight's sake on how do we construct a policy to reflect these things that the nation can get behind and say, yes, this is what reparations is supposed to do.
Okay, well, look, from my point of view, I can say $1 trillion a year for 14 years, checks won't bounce. That works. The government can afford it, so to speak, and it's not, undue hardship on the government.
And so would that be like a part of like the regular financial, the regular national budget, like the DOD spending and Medicaid, Medicare?
Just add it to the budget like you'd add military or anything else. But
okay.
But that doesn't mean I'm not against it, but it doesn't mean I think where you'll get to at the end of 14 years will be very satisfying. It's because I think it's a small part of it, not a small part, but there's a much larger part. It's a large part of an even larger. So it's a high magnitude part of an even higher magnitude problem.
Craemer, you wanted to say something a little while ago. You still remember, or are you good on that?
Yeah, I had a question about an earlier conversation we had about the redistribution, who's going to pay for it in real terms. And I was wondering, Warren, if, since as far as I understood it, it was in relative terms that somebody will have less in relative terms than they would have otherwise, and somebody will have more than they would have otherwise. I wonder whether we should have that conversation and whether it's politically reasonable or not, but people who have intergenerational wealth, who get inheritances, are probably, likely to, or more likely to have a benefit from the capital that slaves, the enslaved produced than others.
Right.
So making sure that people who get large inheritances should be on the losing side in relative terms, understanding that with growth, and I'm not an expert here, I'm not an economist, so with growth, they might not feel any position worse off than previously, but in relative terms, they would make less than they would have otherwise.
Right, well,
Would that be a fair?
Yes, but the additional question is, will they be consuming less? So, I lost half what I had in 2008, but, I'm still eating 3 meals a day and still talking to you guys on the same computer. It hasn't changed my life. And my marginal propensity to consume is next to zero because my consumption's trivial compared to my income, right? And so you're not taking anything real away from me. Now, the guy who's got a family of 3 or 4 and he's working for the government at $50,000 a year down here, he loses something in real terms. So any reduction of real goods and services that he would have had, his share of GDP, so to speak, it's going to go down, and that's who's going to get hurt in real terms.
And
Guy with a high
right, but
marginal propensity to consume,
by linking the relative losses to people who have intergenerational wealth,
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
inheritances.
okay, but these are the kind of questions I'm talking about that I don't know that are being asked, but to me, they're the first thing you have to do. To me, that's a good place to have a starting point.
Okay.
Because it's a moral argument to begin with, more than a legal argument.
Yeah.
Who knows what law legally even means anymore? But and that's part of it. Whose expenses are coming out. If it's coming out of somebody who's even more worthy, that doesn't make any sense to somebody voting
Right.
in Congress. Whether we should. This group, we really owe to them. Well, let's take it out of somebody we owe twice as much to. Wait a minute, no, that doesn't make any sense. So you start with a higher moral ground as you can. You want to take it away from people who are consuming the most because they benefited, right? So let's target.
Right.
Let's somehow.
Well, it's not because they benefited that it's being taken away, or in the terms that you're describing.
Yeah,
it's only being taken away because it was overinflated due to suppression of another group in the first place.
Yeah, well, that's an indirect benefit, sure. That's a I consider that a benefit. But yes, I do. So what was it Freedman's Hospital supposed to do? That was taking care of sick people? Or?
Well, it was just a set aside program for freedmen to have access to healthcare, because obviously during the climate of that time we had separation and we weren't provided equal healthcare and access to hospitals and emergency services.
So is that still the case today then?
Well, the last time
it looks like it to me, but.
Well, yeah, it is still the case. But the last time I seen an appropriation from the OMB was in the 70s. So it was still being allocated. And then they switched it over to Howard Hospital.
Yeah, but if you look at who's going
and then that closed down.
Yeah, but
and then they closed it down.
But if you look at who's going to, emergency rooms for things that should be done to your physician, and who's getting the good primary care, preventive care, it's that same group is still disadvantaged, right?
Yes.
And so.
Yes.
So that can be sort of addressed directly with
Yeah.
public health. With
Yeah,
public
I think,
health.
but
Universal public health.
let me just say this. I think there's a litany of things that can be done that need to be done as far as economic security programs and justice initiatives that do not have to be called reparations. We can craft many different policies and proposals to address economic and social needs for, you know, disadvantaged groups that don't have to be called reparations or included in a reparations package. That way, if we did want to just focus on, let's say, cash payments to individuals as a reparatory program, it would make sense in the long run because we're consciously working on all these other things, but they're not being all tied together. If that's an attainable idea for you gentlemen.
Yeah,
Dr.
look,
Darity,
we've got an institutional structure here where you give somebody $1 million, and 6 months later he's got cancer and it's gone because he's got to pay for it. You know, and it's back where he started from. And that's not going to be every case, but I'm just saying we got a brutal institutional structure that's still digging this hole. And
But I mean,
yeah,
in the absence of universal health care,
Yeah.
there could be two alternatives: either introducing universal health care that would benefit everybody, or there could be a reparations form of it where health care is introduced specifically for the African American descendants of the slave.
right.
So,
well, that was historically, that's what the government healthcare, the first kind of government policies that I looked at were specifically designed for the freedmen, right?
Yeah,
when
why
we
did
look at the social program, because of the necessity, right? When we look at
no, it's because it didn't exist for anybody.
That's true. But they didn't need, the need wasn't generated for such a large group of people until the 4 million former slaves were introduced to a new population. Everybody had a different kind of history. And so it was built out of necessity, of influx of population that were being involved. So that same thing.
And the necessity was neglected.
Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely. And so that's what we're
like
talking about.
Like it is today.
Yes. Yeah. And so if we see that the same neglect for the same specific group of people exists, the same policies that were implemented to address those problems that were not fulfilled are still necessary to be implemented today. Because they adequately addressed those issues then, and if you look at even the letter of the language today would still apply quite perfectly. And so all those things, and what I'm saying, all those things don't have to be called reparations, and everything doesn't have to be done under reparations. I think we should separate and like use what metric, and we have been all together. My organization, right, with my brothers, have all been behind Darity's idea of closing the wealth gap at the mean and not the median. That's been like the thing we've been running on. But and so also I am very much so interested in policy restoration for the freedmen. And so how now the reason why we brought Craemer and everybody onto this discussion is to really make some sense about if this if the 6.2 quadrillion is cash payments to individual families, and that's for 10 years. If it's going to say for the compounded interest, you're doubling 3%, you're getting 6%, and we get 6.2 quadrillion. Is all of that supposed to be cash payments for individuals?
are you asking me specifically?
I'm asking anyone who would like to comment on it. Well,
No,
obviously you and Dr. Darity, y'all the ones who came up and were playing with the figures. So in y'all mind, were y'all saying that like this was all supposed to be allocated to a capital investment in these people?
Well, that particular article that we published didn't speak to the
allocation.
modality.
No.
Right. It was.
I know, that's why I'm asking, because I didn't come away with. That's why that leads me to ask that question.
Right, and my personal position here is this should be determined in negotiations between the descendant community and the federal government. I don't want to, as an outsider, take a position there.
Are you a citizen? Are you American citizen?
I am. Yeah.
Well, I think that you're not an outsider. This is an American. This is a national issue. That's why I don't have all Black people on the panel. Like we have to come together as a nation to figure out the best way to do this. That's what I mean by that.
So if you have an opinion, Thomas, please express.
here's my opinion. It's very important, I think, that the core injustice that happened was that be addressed, and that's the fact that the enslaved were deprived of any decision-making power over their resources. So their descendants should have the decision-making power over the resources that are transferred to them through reparations. The easiest for me to picture that is cash payments, but that's not the only form in which capital can be transferred and the decision-making power can be transferred to the descendants. I'm just a little weary that some of the proposals that are bandied about in the public are the money goes to the banks, for example, directly for housing in Evanston, Illinois, for example, rather than having the descendants decide what to do with the money, the purpose for what it is spent, and the recipients of it are already determined by the policymakers. So that's kind of where I get queasy. So I think it's important to restore the decision-making power, and what form the capital is transferred, that I'm not, I think the goal should be to eliminate the wealth gap sustainably, so that it doesn't reopen up afterwards. And I'm not enough of an economic expert to imagine
you sound pretty good to me, right? So, I think you qualified to speak up on what you feel is right based upon your own intellectual work, and I would encourage you to continue to do so and be as loud as possible as you can, as so far as you link yourself in to that specific group who is owed the justice, like the good Dr. Darity there. And so, Dr. Darity, I know that report was what y'all were doing, but in terms like that, can I get that answer from you as well? In terms of like, even at the 14 trillion number or the 6.2, is it all like a capital investment in the qualified recipients, as far as like just payments to individuals, or is that part of the funding of the reparations?
From my perspective, like other cases in which reparations payments have been made, it should be direct payments to the eligible recipients. Okay. Now, the question that remains, though, is what form should those payments take? And I'm thinking that perhaps it should be a mix of a cash transfer, a mix of some less liquid type of asset, like an annuity or a trust account. And of course, if you offer a less liquid asset, you reduce the prospects that all of the funds will be spent at one time. And the reason why that's desirable is not because I think people will do stupid things with the money. It's desirable as another way of restraining the likelihood that you would produce inflation.
Yeah, that's completely responsible, in my opinion. I 100% agree with you. So like now, like that's beautiful, because that's where I'm at with it in my mind, and most of my well, all of us are in complete solidarity on that too. It needs to be like a mixed thing. So when we get down to crafting legislation, I don't know if like anyone's like willing to like get hands on or not, if anyone's doing that in their own time or not. But as far as legislatively, how do we start to go ahead and solidify how much is liquid and how much is hard, and what kind of diversified hard asset packages are we actually specifying in a reparations program or project? Because when people talk about it who are serious, that's the things that they're going to want to know. And I think as far as like, if this is being debated in a committee or at the House floor, these are the things that people are going to want to have detailed, specific conversations about. And so if we could really be like expertly, versed in like, and make it make sense on the merit, I think that would be a winnable argument. But like I said, if we just go in there like, 6.2 quadrillion, Republicans are going to destroy that. You know what I mean? And, they might have a lot of Democrats that don't go for that as well. I think we need to package it a little better. You know what I mean?
Agree.
I think that, as I said, part of the determination has to be some assessment of the potential inflationary effects. The other part of it, though, ought to be a consequence of communication with the community, the recipient community, about what their sense is of the best division of the resources between direct cash payments and direct transfers that take the form of some less liquid type of asset. So I think it would be a combination of those two considerations: what the freedmen want, and what's strategically best from the standpoint of making sure that we preserve the value of the currency as we conduct this allocation.
It's really like what the freedmen want and what the freedmen need, right? And we have to have like a nice healthy balance of the two. And so, but the needs must be met. The wants we can but the needs is what I'm concerned with. I want the 6.2 quadrillion to be all cash, perhaps, maybe, right? But the needs kind of bring reality into that. And so we need,
I mean, $6.2 quadrillion is more than the total global income. And so it would definitely, I mean, if you paid that out at one time, there's no question you would have a massive inflationary effect. You'd have something like the German hyperinflation. So you really do need to think about the magnitude and the process of payment to make sure that we avoid having that type of disaster. I mean, we've got enough pressure in this country to move towards fascism as it is. You don't want hyperinflation also.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Even trying to like pay that out over one lifetime, right? Over one person's generation would cause inflation, right? The 6.2 quadrillion.
6.2 quadrillion, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say that 6.2, some people propose that the 6.2 is a 50-year program. Is that more economically feasible?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
we don't know what the country's going to be like.
Tanner is saying if you pay it out over the course of somebody's lifetime, you're still going to have.
Yeah, and I could definitely live for 50 years.
That's a big number.
Yeah. Right. And I don't think a lot of people look at what the accumulative effects of all of the things involved with reparations and it will have on them. Some people criticize your number and said that 10 years, 14 trillion of having a program getting, allocated $1 trillion a year for 10 years or whatever, however that plays out, was not enough. And I say, I don't think that they look at that in conjunction with what their life would look like if you had like a credit reset, if you had like a education voucher where you got free education. I don't think that they look at the accumulative, like a tax incentive. I don't think that they look at the accumulative advantages and the monetary gains in conjunction with each other. I think like your whole life would change. You know what I mean?
Even like the specific programs you was talking about, like reestablishing the Freedmen Hospital and bolstering the HBCU's trust, to produce more scholars and doctors and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Of course, in my most cynical moments, I fear that if you were to improve the financial conditions of HBCUs, they would no longer be HBCUs.
Yeah, they'd be PWIs, but then that means
that'd still be historical, though.
Policy.
I think that people are going to look at it sort of the other way around. So if today's GDP is 30 trillion, how much of that is attributable to each person, the per capita? How much would you have had, and over the next 10 years, 20 years, not static, but the freedmen would have had or would have contributed to, or their descendants this year only got 5% of that. If they hadn't been discriminated against, they would have got a per capita share, a pro rata share rather than a discounted share. And I think you're going to be faced with that question. And at the same time, you can say, look, how much past wealth that's distributed away from us that's been consumed? How much consumption have we forgiven? You know, how much less food have we eaten? How many fewer cars have we driven? How many less educational, hours have we had? And now we should have more hours than our per capita share. So you're going to have to look at it. You don't want to answer that question for the first time when it comes up. You want to look at those questions ahead of time and have an understanding of it so that you're ready for, good-
Warren, can I ask you a question? Are you familiar with the article? I forgot which one of the my partners might know the name of the actual article. It said that withholding reparations actually has cost the country 16 trillion in GDP. And so I think that, like, if you look at
it doesn't quite say that. It claims that racism has cost the
okay. I know
$16 trillion.
something like that.
And it's an accounting exercise. So I
stay away from that one.
I don't want to assign any credibility to that.
Okay.
As much as I'd like to be able to say it's true.
Yeah, I always wanted to get an expert opinion on that because I looked at that and I'm like, that's very interesting. I wonder how they kind of quantified that. But
we're doing a project now trying to assess all of these studies that claim a certain amount of cost are associated with racism or the failure to close the racial wealth gap. Yeah.
I would look at, I would look at the margin, how many, Black unemployment, how much higher it is in terms of hours per year, and then incarceration, how disproportionately higher it is, and assign, assume those people could have had jobs at the per capita GDP wage, whatever it is, and for however many years, and then you can get an idea of the lost output. So that shouldn't be that hard to do. It's probably more than that. It's got to be a very large number. That's the cost of racism.
I would like to get,
but it's higher than that because it doesn't assume any productivity gains from all those people where they would have had contributed to productivity gains.
True. Now, with that being said, I would like to get an opinion from each one of you on this idea. Now, let's say that a part of a program would be, let's say this was in a reparations program, that we wanted to build 10 cities across, we wanted to build 5 cities across, 10 cities across 5 different states, right? So like 2 cities per state, which are going to be like Freedmen, Restoration, Development Town, or destination cities, right? Like they were doing originally. They went out to Oklahoma, they built Tulsa, and that was a very successful city, right? So Freedman knew that because of the climate of the country, it was necessary to kind of like build something new. You wasn't going to just immediately get integrated into white communities, right? So we were building our own towns and communities during like right after Reconstruction. So what would be the productivity or the add to GDP if we have something, obviously that's going to be construction and infrastructure costs, which create human resource needs, which is employment opportunities, which is actually generating GDP for the country, right? So like, are we taking into account what these, like if you have a program and project like this, it's going to create jobs, it's going to create wages, and it's going to actually build things like you're going to more stores will have to be there, more grocery stores. So it's going to create opportunities for growth as far as like production is concerned as well. So are we looking at in terms of like programs that include things like that?
Well, that's what we need to do. I don't know that there's an existing study that does that satisfactorily.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Like,
I had one question as well. When I was thinking about what Professor Craemer was saying about the amount of payout that it should be as far as the quadrillions and that being maybe the proper amount.
Bring him on in. Get Brother Iseem in here. He got some questions.
Yeah. He's out of school today for Thursday, right. Friday, and Monday. So
yeah.
But I was trying to get at the amount that the quadrillions was if the payout were to go to the original people that were enslaved. And that number being that, so you're saying that that number probably would not be the number that would apply to the descendants. And that's, is that, and I found that is, I find that's similar, similarly consistent with the way that, let's just say the most recent payouts from the Holocaust in the United States, where the French descendants and the survivors were paid a certain amount. I think it was like 400 something thousand, but then their descendants were only paid, you know, a certain, they weren't paid the 400,000 a piece. They were paid like a smaller number. And I wanted to just bring that up because we see now the border, the family separation at the border, they're in negotiations of 450,000 a piece. And we're kind of up in arms, like, wait, how can you talk about paying them? But we haven't received anything in terms of reparations yet. And do you think, like, so how do you think that argument holds? Do you think that that has more validity because they're the actual living people that experience the damages as opposed to generational damages? Just trying to weigh in on that, if y'all don't mind.
So I think that living descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States are experiencing direct victimization right now.
Yes.
So I think that that's why people justifiably might be concerned that the Black claim is being pushed to the back of the bus for this other claim. You know, both groups have experienced direct victimization. It's just that the direct victimization that is being experienced by Black Americans who have ancestors who were enslaved here, the posterity of the freedmen, if you will, that victimization is not the same, doesn't take the exact same form as the victimization that their ancestors experienced.
Exactly.
It is a consequence of the long-term effects of the victimization that their ancestors experienced, but it is not the same form of victimization. And you know, I really get annoyed when people talk about how professional athletes are highly paid slaves. I think that there are forms of exploitation of professional athletes, no question, but slavery is a whole different ballgame.
So you're essentially saying that the form of victimization we're facing today is more along the lines of economic depravity and the fact that the racial wealth gap exists.
Yeah, and also the fact that our lives are devalued completely, as they have been historically in the United States. They're still heavily devalued by this society.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
the big thing. That's the big thing right there. It just gets worse and worse.
Yeah,
Absolutely. All right, and we've gotten a lot out of this discussion. I really appreciate everybody's participation in this. And as we move forward, my aims and objective is that the construction of comprehensive, you know, digestible, nationally speaking, proposals are being constructed. And with to me, that Dr. Darity is at the forefront. He's, in my personal opinion, it's not to like over magnify him. It's just my personal opinion on his work. It seems to be the most practical work that I have researched, right? It makes the most sense in my mind. And so, like, obviously this is a justice claim for a large group of people who are important as well. So I think like what the freedmen did, they had a commission that had people go to various places where freedmen were affected and get testimonies on how that impacted what they actually felt they needed. That's how you got land as part of the proposals. They said, what are you suffering? What would make you be more American and access to your stuff? And so that's where we read a lot of these different commission testimonies that they submitted. These like they went down to Georgia, they went to South Carolina, and people told them exactly what they need. And I think a lot of that would be appropriate for now, which I think hopefully that's what HR 40 is supposed to be trying to do. I don't know how much that it will fulfill that need, but things like that are very necessary to kind of get the language of proposals together. And so that makes sense. So no one can say, well, Dr. Darity or Craemer, they're trying to circumscribe reparations for everybody, right? So like they have the experts doing the work, and then we get the people to chime in on what their actual, I think that if we do that anyway, there's really going to just echo the things that have already been expertly put together, but it just builds, it builds that capital up, that social capital. Like the people say, this is what we need. It echoes the research. Let's get it done nationally, right? And so we need more Craemers on board. We need more Moslers on board, and you know, we have to have it, and that's why I wanted you all to be invited to this discussion so that we can take what we learned here today and take it back to our groups, right? And get them impregnated with this fire, right, for justice, and have them give birth to ideas and comments and testimony.
Oh,
I think I accidentally muted myself.
okay.
All right, and so that we can all come together, because it's only so much logic is going to get out of going to speak to a large crowd of white folks, right? Warren Mosler, especially, and you break that up into classes, my success rate is going to drop and drop and drop, right? And so like if I get Warren Mosler can go into rooms where if he's saying the same exact thing that they didn't want to hear from me, they'll take it from you, Warren. They're like, hell, that's Warren. Let's take that. Or and the same for you, Craemer, right? And so my thing is, if we can be, I think we all are interested, from what I gather, we all are interested in the same things and getting it done the right way that's in the national interest, right? And so if we could be like, I just don't want to be a cacophony. If we can be a symphony, right, that would be the best, right? That sounds better, and the nation want to listen to something like that. But if we're a bunch of different instruments making sounds all over the nation, it's going to be quite horrible to listen to. And so that's how, you know, I would like to refine the reparations space, bringing the grassroots and like the experts and then like the social classes together, you know, and man, we got to talk again. I know everyone has things to do. We've been on for about an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah,
and
I've got to go to dinner.
Yeah, I know.
I'm an old guy. We eat early.
Hear you.
5:30 dinner.
I'm hungry now myself.
I sure appreciate
talk about lobster. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, I did. And so, gentlemen, with great honor and respect for you all's time today, and if we could get together, you know, at another venture, you know, not to be determined today, I'll talk to each of you, and we just recap after I know we're going to think about this and be like, damn, I wanted to say this, and you know, so let's communicate regularly if you know, if that's possible, and really kind of like get a working relationship among us, you know, like our organization, Be the Power Incorporated and United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen. We have this is like our life's work to get this done as far as other things. So let's stay connected, please. And thank you, Josh, Ibrahim, Ali, any of y'all got anything to say before we close out?
Yeah, I would like to just say that I appreciate everything that's been said so far. And it's my hope that we can actually, with the minds that we have here, put together one of the best and most comprehensive reparations proposal that Congress will get a chance to view and review. You know, that's my hope about all of this. So it's not just us talking about it, but we're actually doing it to try to get to a certain conclusion and move this thing forward.
Yes. Josh?
Much respect to everybody that joined today. I really enjoyed the perspective. I was tempted to go get a bowl of popcorn at one point. I was like, man, this is like, some people might want to see like Mike Tyson sparring or something like that. I was like, this is the type of heavyweight conversations I'm like privileged to hear. So thank you to all three of you guys for joining. And I mean, I hopefully we can extend the conversation, you know, talk about some new things as we progress. So thank you again.
Ibrahim, what you got?
I just appreciate everybody's being here and having a conversation. I just hope we can continue. I think this is a very diverse panel, different socioeconomic classes. So you'll get a lot of different input from different people. And I just appreciate everybody for being here. Thank you.
Okay. All right, but Dr. Darity, before I let you, I know you're ready to go, but
let me.
Oh, I didn't know you.
Lord Alva has the word.
I just want to say, Peach, I just listened to about the last 45 minutes. at work. I'm very hyped right now. Thank you all for being on. I've learned so much already. I feel smarter. Thank you. Peace,
Yeah.
y'all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, the brother was working. We really wanted him on the conversation as well, but he was able to listen. One thing I do with what they said before I let you go, Darity, if you care to speak about it before you exit, with HR 40 being where it is, I know we weren't able to improve that introductory legislation as far as getting all of the edits that we wanted. But at this point in time, is it advantageous to support that HR 40 legislation so that we can have the opportunity to actually get those proposals on those in the commission's hands, so that maybe we could be the leading proposal submitters, right? And maybe fix the errors or what the legislation lacks. Maybe we can put the teeth in with the actual proposals that they're supposed to present to Congress. Is that a position that you're interested in taking, or do you feel that HR 40 is problematic altogether?
I think HR 40 is problematic altogether because I think it's been designed to give the NARC and COBRA access control over that particular commission. And so if that is what transpires, I don't think there'll be a really significant opportunity to put the most sound proposals forward through that commission. So I'm of a mind at this point that we're probably better off if HR 40 dies, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would like to say thank you both to Warren and to Thomas in particular for having a really engaged and thoughtful conversation about these issues. And I'd like to thank the BTP brothers for organizing this conversation. I think it's a springboard for us to really begin to refine the proposal for reparations. And so thank you all.
I like to say I thank you also. I've learned a lot, and it's just really glad I was in on this conversation. And you got to let me go to dinner, or I'm never going to be on any conversation anyway. So.
Oh yeah, appreciate you, Warren.
Okay.
I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
All right,
Dr.
thank you
Darity,
so much
I sent
for-
you a message in the chat. I didn't want to belabor the conversation, but if you could check it out, and maybe we can talk at a later time if you run out of time now.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Craemer, you got any last words?
Thank you all for such a fascinating conversation and for allowing me to be part of it. So I'm very excited about it.
All right, thank you for
very much.
participation. We'll be in touch. I'll be emailing you, Craemer.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys.
Bye.